Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in so many layers of turbulence and change, it's hard to keep track. This is Andy Revkin. Going to be speaking today about weather modification, chemtrails, geoengineering, and that whole morass of mostly mythology and other issues. And Matt Capucci, who's been doing yeoman's work nonstop in the digital trenches, will probably be here on around the half hour, 12:30. I'm going to take live questions. I'll put up a QR code that you can click to come on live if you want. Actually, there it is. So just take a picture of that. If you want to join me in the studio with civility, if you're just coming on to be an idiot, I can ban you forever if that matters to you. Jim Fleming, who is an emeritus professor of history of technology and science at Colby, is scheduled to be here to talk about his book, Fixing the Sky, which is directly centered on the history of weather modification, right from the earliest days of guys shooting rockets into the air and setting fires, trying to create clouds in the Southwest, to the current events with everything that's happening with geoengineering. And he's a little late. I haven't seen him come on yet, but we're going to get going just because this issue is hot and there's so much ridiculous overstatement out there. Not just overstatement, but misstatement. I wanted to start with by rebroadcasting something that the journalists and meteorologists at Channel 9 in Oklahoma City had done after their weather radar was attacked by a whack job out in Oklahoma City, a place where weather radar is incredibly important. So here's what they did on July 10th or so after a fellow who's since been arrested. Oh, wait, here's an email from Jim Fleming. He's okay. He'll be on in a minute. Join as soon as you can. Thanks. So let me just play this because it tells you that this weather modification issue is not just one of mythology that floats around on the internet and makes people crazy and is unscientific. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. And so here is why it's dangerous.
The man suspected of vandalizing our next-gen live weather radar is in jail tonight on unrelated complaints.
Oklahoma City police took Anthony Mitchell into custody this afternoon. Officers believe he is the man caught right there on security video on Sunday night, destroying the radar's power supply. Now, that has since been restored. The investigation is still underway. Mitchell is in jail for complaints of destruction of property and violation of a protective order. But this really is bigger than just what happened to us. An anti-government group called Veterans on Patrol is claiming responsibility for the News 9 radar vandalism.
So Jim Fleming is now in the green room. I'm going to bring him on so we can get going. Hey, Jim.
Hi.
We are live. We started, and I just was reiterating earlier that you're the author. You're a emeritus professor of the history of science and technology with a particular focus on meteorological and climate science. And it's great to connect this way. Your book is an essential resource still. I mentioned it and we'll talk about it again. But I wanted to start with this pretty nutty but consequential event that happened in Oklahoma City, in a state where tornado preparedness and monitoring and warning is a critical part of keeping people safe. And earlier this month, a guy he climbed the fence and broke into and destroyed their weather radar, at least temporarily. And just going to play this a little bit, and then we can start to talk about all of this. Hold on a second.
And its leader has wild conspiracies over the impact of weather radars. News 9's Elizabeth Fitz spoke with him today and joins us now live from downtown OKC. And Elizabeth, this guy had a lot to say.
That's right. Veterans on Patrol, which the Southern Poverty Law Center calls an anti-government militia, tells me they are targeting Oklahoma weather radars, which they believe control the weather. News 9 confirmed this sign was posted near an Oklahoma weather radar, warning that Doppler radars are being targeted. Is it true that Veterans on Patrol is targeting Oklahoma weather radars?
Absolutely.
Michael Lewis Arthur Meyer, the founder of Veterans on Patrol, says he posted the sign and that the government is controlling the weather.
They can embed their technology in civilian infrastructure in every home and every household, utilizing the phones and their network towers to not only control the weather, modify the weather, but they can do targeted individuals.
But News 9 chief meteorologist David Payne says that's not what weather radars do at all.
We have one of the most powerful live radars. Well, we do. The most powerful live radar in Oklahoma.
And when it's sabotaged,
we cannot track flooding. We cannot track severe weather. We cannot track tornadoes. And it basically becomes, instantly obsolete.
Meyer argues that the U.S. military is also behind weather modification.
Because when the military plays God with the weather, they're mocking our Heavenly Father.
I wish it were that easy. I wish we could turn it on and say, oh, let's make that tornado go away.
Boy. So Jim, this feels new to some folks, but, the same thing happened after Hurricane Helene. And going back in time and through your book, of course, there's this whole phenomenon, enduring phenomenon of people having outsized expectations about what humans can do to the weather, and we'll get to the climate a little later. Can you just talk through a little bit about, take this sort of wind the clock back here to what drew you into this particular morass, and how long ago this kind of started, this sort of mix of science and hucksterism and now conspiracy?
Yeah, that's really unfortunate about the damaging of the Oklahoma radar. They're a world leader in severe storms research. And that conspiracy idea that Doppler radar could intervene in the weather is, I think the meteorologists got it right. It's just not true.
Yeah.
I was trained in astronomy and atmospheric science, and I worked in NCAR. I worked with the people that wanted to cloud seed the weather, but I never cloud seeded. I was up there tracing some of the silver iodide plumes when our plane almost crashed. We were only flying in bad weather, and we clipped off the top of some pine trees out near Seattle. And my job was to maintain the instruments, which we had collected a big branch off of a pine tree. And about one more meter lower in that storm, we would have crashed. At that point, I also learned that I was on a project that was looking at upper atmospheric cirrus clouds, the ice clouds, because the government wanted to find out if the Air Force wanted to know if their nose cones would survive the reentry through the ice clouds. And at that point in my life, I was just disgusted with the whole thing. The PI had never told me about the military funding. Mm-hmm. And I figured I needed a more sustainable way to interact with the atmosphere. So I had the opportunity to resign from, this was the University of Washington Department of Atmospheric Science. And I was able to resign from that group and pursue my interest in the history of science, which I did.
And I want to walk this back a few seconds when you were saying the research was military funded, and there's some of the roots of the current conspiracies do go back to when there were experiments and tests and through that whole era. You in your book, you have these sort of three phases of the history of intentions and around weather modification. Maybe you could walk through them. The early one, the middle one, which is kind of what you were alluding to there, and then where we are now.
Yeah, you wanted me to roll it back, and I would roll it back to Greek mythology and the desire to control nature and to play God with the weather, and it includes Helios's son Phaeton, who wanted to drive the sun chariot. So it's a perennial idea that humans, and a perennial idea filled with hubris, that humans could control the weather. The military has been involved, at least in the U.S., since the War of 1812, because they were losing more troops to environmental causes than they were to hostile causes. And so the Army Surgeon General required the surgeons to keep a record of the weather. And so the link between meteorology and the military goes way back. I've written about this. Our first weather service in the U.S. was run by the U.S. Army Signal Corps, who had been successful in tracing Confederate troop movements. And then when the war was over, they were getting mustered out with the regular army. And General Meyer said, hey, let's trace storms. They're sort of like moving around like Confederate armies. And we use telegraphy to warn about the oncoming storm. So there was definitely a military mindset. The technology has often been military, using surplus military equipment, particularly airplanes in the 19 teens. If something just went off.
No, I hear you.
Radar.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Did I make that noise or what?
What are you hearing?
Just clicking and
Oh, let me double check. It's not my microphone. Sometimes it's.
static.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's you don't hear it, right?
No, but it could be my mic. Hold on.
I hear sort of static and feedback.
Yeah, it's probably my microphone. Hold on. Let me switch mics. 1 second.
Sure.
Which is frustrating. I have to fix that. Let's try. Sound is clear. Do you still hear it?
Not right now, no.
Yeah, good. Okay. It's a microphone problem here.
Just to follow the thought, in the 1870s, there were no foreign threats to the U.S. The threats were domestic. There were striking workers in Pittsburgh, and there were concerns about locust swarms, and of course the storms. And then the military decided that they would be reporting on these things, even as the U.S. Weather Service. The Weather Bureau records are full of military reports from General Meyer and his associates. So there's quite a long history, and it goes into the 20th century with the experiments with airplanes. And it seems like most of the weather control ideas are in some ways connected with military possibilities and hardware. And those possibilities become much more magnified after World War II, when we have rockets, computers, hydrogen bombs. And so you see a plethora of proposals to try to intervene in the climate, even crack the polar ice caps with hydrogen bombs. And all these things are most of these things are in the realm of pure fantasy. The military really has a lot of discipline, but they don't have a lot of good ideas.
Yeah, and is there were cases during the Vietnam War and elsewhere where there was the active effort to consider using cloud seeding, particularly or the like, to as a tool of war?
Yeah, that's right. With the attempt to make rain over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was identified in the New York Times and then brought to the U.S. Congress. Senator Claiborne Pell brought up the idea. Then it went to the United Nations, where that was a moment when Nixon had resigned, and we had a caretaker president taking care of the country, and it was a great opportunity for the Russians to bring up this idea of the hostile use of weather modification should be banned, and that became the so-called NMOD treaty. We were using Agent Orange, the Rhone Plow. We were bombing the dikes of North Vietnam, and weather mod was of a piece of that whole environmental warfare convention, which is still in effect with the United Nations, but it's never been invoked, that weather control should not be used for hostile purposes.
Yeah, and that also sits there. Even if there's limited evidence, you can do significant control of the weather. Just the fact that it's in a treaty and it gives people something to latch on to if they're seeking conspiracy.
Yeah, they're grasping at straws, and this opening you had is really stunning because there are pieces of information that the military had been interested in. The generals used to say, if you control the weather, you can control the war, control the world, actually. And they talked about General Mud and General Snow and General Rain. And if you could get your Air Force into the air and the enemy couldn't fly, you would definitely have a strategic advantage on that. So the military has been interested, and there's also this dimension where we don't know exactly what the military is doing, at least in experimental programs. I had a colleague, a very high level professor in public policy. They said, "Oh, the military's not doing any of that stuff. They don't do anything." And I just asked him, I said, "How high is your security clearance?" He said, "Not high enough, because there are experimental things that might be going on, but that doesn't verify a conspiracy theory, and that certainly doesn't justify monkey wrenching a weather radar, which is just done out of ignorance."
Yeah, just and clearly weather can be a critical factor in war. In my book in 2018 on the history of human experience with weather and climate and learning, there was a chapter on that, and this is a French drawing of Le Général Hiver, which was Russia's. Anyone trying to invade Russia faced this massive foe. They did it the wrong season, and so that fundamental reality is there for sure as well.
What's the date? What's the date of that? Because there were at least 3 misguided military campaigns.
That was 1916.
Okay, so World War I. So there was, the Swedes tried it, and Napoleon tried it, and Hitler tried it, and I guess now there's one from World War I trying Russian.
By the way, that chapter I wrote for that book, I quoted this in an unreal account. Hitler did some dinners where he was recorded, and his dinner conversations were memorialized. And he said, "One can't put any trust in the meteorological service forecasts. Weather prediction is not a science that can be learned mechanically. What we need are men gifted with a sixth sense, who live in nature and with nature, whether or not they know anything about isotherms and isobars." Hitler said that. And this is not too far before he sent troops toward Moscow. And they, of course, had a bad experience.
Yeah, I guess your monkey wrenchers have no sense, not even a sixth sense.
No, it's really, it's crazy. And if you frequent social media these days, of course, there's astonishing levels of credulity around some of these claims. Just it's mind-blowing, really, to anyone who thinks remotely rationally. But yet it's a big part of the discussion when bad things happen. As I said earlier, Hurricane Helene, and the recent flooding in Texas generated enormous amounts of misinformation. And then you had politicians getting into the mix and saying things like, let's see, well, you have this weird, this is where you have this weird superposition of, in Texas, there is cloud seeding. You can get a license, you can do it. There was a cloud seeding operation in Texas in the days ahead of this event. And of course, immediately that led to all these conspiracy statements linking these two things. And you have congressmen, a congresswoman like Marjorie Taylor Greene, jumping on the bandwagon. Have you seen anything like this going back through your history, looking at these phenomena?
Well, sure. There were unfortunate incidents that were after the fact of cloud seeding, but probably not because of the fact. one of the early ones was Hurricane King in 1947, where the General Electric scientists had identified dry ice, and they were trying to use it off the coast of Florida, but they weren't allowed to use it, according to the GE lawyers. The U.S. military, they were flying the plane. The military planes were flying. The GE scientists were observing, and they intervened in Hurricane King, one of the few named hurricanes of that era. And after they seeded it with a few pounds of dry ice, but not because they seeded it, the hurricane veered over and smashed into Savannah, Georgia. It killed one person, knocked down some property, and the GE. This was under the leadership of Irving Langmuir, the Nobel laureate. And Langmuir was all planning to have a press conference about how they could control the hurricanes, and he immediately canceled the press conference. They went underground, sort of. They couldn't suppress Langmuir that much, but Langmuir buttoned up, and the record of that storm and that intervention was put into a military archive that didn't see light until 1979.
Mm.
So it was many, many years later that we finally could look at the archive and see what had actually happened. And what had actually happened was a large steering current had brought the storm on shore. It looked like it was going out to sea.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the dry ice. I can guarantee that. There's other events, like there was a flooding up in South Dakota after a weather mod experiment. But again, it was just correlation, not causation. There was an issue in England where some cloud seeding had gone on, and there was a flood in Bournemouth, England. And so immediately they began to accuse the experimenters of having caused the flood. But there's no proof of that. And so on. So there's a couple examples like that from the 40s and 50s. There are probably some from more recent times too, but those are the ones that come to mind right now.
But not necessarily in earlier eras. I know in the book and in some of your scholarly papers, you talk about more, I guess it was more commercialization or sort of the huckster aspect of weather modification. There were some amazing experiments with fire and all kinds of things, and where municipalities ended up, happily going along.
Yeah, they'll pay for this stuff. There's a guy in Laredo. He goes by the moniker Heatwave Burler. He was a TV meteorologist, and he's a delightful guy. And he learned that they were trying to build a very expensive weather intervention tower on the Texas-Mexico border. And they would use some sort of proprietary techniques to control the weather of Laredo. And he took his very short weather reports every evening, and he would take a piece of that report and tell people that this is not really possible, that there is no, it was supposed to be a Russian secret technology. And he says, Russian is a major language and a lot of people can speak and read Russian. So it's not that secret. And so the conspiracy flourishes, I think, with suspicion, with secrecy, with some aspect that you think some other foreign power or military is controlling the weather. And that was one of the most entertaining because he debunked it, and he is rightfully. I don't know where I wrote about him. I might have put a little bit of that in the book Fixing the Sky.
Believe it or not, he's on Twitter. It looks like.
Yeah, he's quite a champion of this debunking. He's a good meteorologist. He's a wonderful person. We meet about every year or 2 years maybe, at the American Meteorological Society. There he is.
There he is.
You're really good at bringing up these things.
Well, yeah, I just keep the screens open and have a look around. I just started following him, Richard Heatwave Burler.
I think to give him some credit here because he debunked the weather mod secret tower built by Russians that were using some sort of electromagnetic waves to control the weather of Laredo.
That's just remarkable. I want to go back into the current politics of this because it's getting pretty wild. Lee Zeldin, the EPA administrator, has weighed in a way saying we're going to use full transparency to reveal everything the government's doing related to weather modification. But it's kind of a way to legitimize things.
Right.
And Bobby Kennedy, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, said, "I'm so proud of my friend Lee Zeldin and President Donald Trump for their commitment to finally shatter the deep state omerta regarding the diabolical mass poisoning of our people, our communities, our waterways and farms, our Purple Mountains majesty." We're at an interesting juncture. That's all I can say. It's kind of
you stimulated the idea that this could be really good for historians and public policy scholars. This is like low hanging fruit. When I was doing the book, when I started this book, it was 2000. It was about 2006. The book came out in 2010, but I had done a lot on weather mod, and then our Nobel laureate friend Paul Crutzen came out with a modest proposal to fire naval cannons in the tropics to control the climate, and
right.
And I said I actually know Crutzen. He's gone now, but I said, Paul, do you think you should ask the locals if you should fire these cannons? And ask permission. You'd have to. Well, one of my colleagues and I worked. I don't think we ever published this, but we looked at how much gunpowder it would take, how much the World War II battleship guns would have to be remelted and retooled to do this kind of job. We did kind of a quantitative analysis that said there would be more pollution from the firing than there would be from the results of the firing. And so anyway. And I asked Crutzen one time, do you think the Anthropocene should be called the Anthro-obscene because everything humans do to intervene seems to go wrong? And so it's another example for me. That was when I was working on what I was considering low-hanging fruit. I was trained in atmospheric science. I had written a little bit about weather mod, especially about Langmuir and General Electric. And then I gave a talk for one of their big conferences out west at the NASA headquarters or NASA Ames. And the people after the talk said, gee, that checkered history, that's why I put checkered history in the subtitle of the book. That checkered history sounds something like eugenics. You know, we better be careful with this, the past mistakes and the faux pas and we don't have so the book has no heroes in it. The book has just people who were mostly misled or overly enthusiastic, or even the Nobel laureate Langmuir was pathologically invested in his hurricane and weather modification. So it's kind of a history of science without the heroes. There's nobody standing on anybody's shoulders.
Yeah, you're taking me back to 1965. You know, when I did that book that came out in 2018, there was a chapter on the first presidentially requested assessment of climate change.
I recognize Lady Bird. Who's the other person there?
That's Johnson.
I'm kidding you.
Yeah. But here's what's so interesting. You know, it was the first assessment for a president of climate change, greenhouse gas driven climate change. And the implications were laid out. Ravel and others, Raleigh Broker, were involved. But their conclusion was immediately to jump to
geoengineering,
deliberately bringing about countervailing climate changes. It wasn't, we need to control the emissions of greenhouse gases. So there seems to be some aspect of how humans think about these problems that immediately we jump to the intervention. And not necessarily. And I see Matt Capucci is in the green room. I'm going to bring him on right now too.
Okay.
But maybe you could reflect briefly on that idea that, again, here in this assessment, a special message to Congress on climate change, the experts immediately kind of went to the intervention.
Yeah, they had an idea to put plastic floating particles or balls in the Arctic to increase the albedo. And nobody thought about what would happen with all this plastic in the Arctic. 1965 is really it's a moment that a lot of people refer to, and sometimes they claim we should have known back then, which is just a counterfactual, which doesn't make any sense to a historian.
Not at all. So Matt, you are like in nonstop motion for now years. I've watched you come of age on social media, trying to be a rational communicator amid when bad things are happening, the actual events, and then also clarifying what's true and not true about what's driving things. So congratulations for all that hard work.
Well, thank you. I
You
appreciate
deserve a medal of some kind. And at the same time, I just want to bring up some of your what you've been doing. First of all, where are you? You're not Jim Cantori, but are you anywhere near bad weather right now, or are you back home?
Right now, I'm in DC, and I'm actually heading on vacation for the first time this year in about 2 weeks. So I have a nice little stretch coming up.
Okay, and I want to encourage anyone who wants to ask a question live in the studio. Has to be civil, or you get banned forever, and you don't come right on the screen. That just take a picture of that QR code, and you can come on. So Matt, maybe you could describe. You've been at this as a meteorologist, a communicator on Capital Weather Gang, and now you're with My Radar. Did you immediately experience the challenges of the miscommunication out there, or did that sort of build recently?
I think I've had some frustrations with how much miscommunication was out there for about 3 or 4 years, but things really seemed to reach an inflection point last year around the time that Helene made landfall. When we saw the predecessor rain event and subsequent flooding in the Carolinas, it seemed like that's what all the conspiracy accounts really used to capitalize on and garner engagement and clicks and monetization on social media. And suddenly it's just been like that ever since. And it's disappointing to see how many of these conspiracies are becoming mainstream. In the past, it would only be crazy Uncle Larry at Thanksgiving spouting off with this nonsense. Now all the crazy Uncle Larrys are reaching out to each other, collaborating, and unfortunately subverting the general public. And the general public has been decreasingly smart for decades. I mean, it's no secret that we are participating in the dumbing down of America. And I know that will probably get me some flack. Some folks are going to be very uncomfortable with that remark, but it's true. Every 10 years, we shave off a couple IQ points off the American average, and slowly our society is losing the ability to discern fact from fiction. And when you have bad actors, as there are many on social media, it makes it that much tougher to get good information out there in a sea of cacophonous noise and bad information.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. He's my favorite example.
Well, one of many examples. How is this natural? I mean, to a meteorologist, I don't know how do you avoid just having your head explode every hour?
What's crazy? I gave up drinking 6 months ago, and I need a drink nowadays more than ever. But no, in all seriousness, I think everything's a conspiracy when people understand nothing. And what floors me is that, if you went out to a restaurant with one of your buddies and you got the menus and he said, "Oh, would you mind reading this for me?" I never bothered with that reading stuff. I don't know how to read. That would not be socially acceptable. That would be a source of embarrassment for that person. But when it comes to math and science, basic scientific literacy, understanding the very basics of the world around us, Americans largely lack that. And it's socially acceptable to not understand that the moon comes out in the daytime, that a cloud is a normal cloud, why there's a ring around the sun. And I'm not saying everybody needs a degree in atmospheric sciences, but what I am saying is it would help save people a lot of the time wasted on conspiracy theories if they just understood the basics of how the world works. I mean, in this case, this lady right there is either dumber than a bag of rocks or is engagement farming. She has a degree in English literature and is taking pictures of ordinary clouds and proclaiming that there are vibration waves, whatever the hell those are, overhead. And
I know, but she knows what she's doing. She's a very prominent New York Times bestseller writer on other fronts, and she's just building and maintaining an audience. And we seem to be very happy. I mean, not me, but there seems to be an inability of people to avoid that sort of cheering, being part of the cheering for these things. Jim, again, you've tracked the history of American attitudes towards cloud seeding and weather modification and geoengineering, through this century and before. What do you think about the dumbing down question? Or is it just that social media makes it easier to appear dumb? Were we always like?
I think dumbing down is one metaphor, and that's true enough. I mean, people can't make change anymore. They can't balance their books, and we've had another phenomena, which is the declensionist narrative ever since the Anthropocene. We talked about Critson later, that everything's going downhill, and that you picked up this with RFK Jr., that all these things are poisoning us. All these things are going down. You shouldn't have children. You shouldn't look forward to the future. How do we get engaged in climate mourning for what the climate used to be? And that kind of narrative feeds together. So I sometimes go to literature meetings where everybody is decrying the environment and finding ways in which literature supports that. So what happened was, I think the meteorology community, they kind of lost control of the narrative about 10, 15 years ago. And it became a general, everybody can make statements about the weather, but they can't all be rational statements. And I taught a course called Weather, Climate, and Society for many, many years. And none of the students in the class, I think, became professional meteorologists. I think one of them did. But out of the hundreds of kids, I just wanted to make sure that they knew that this is your atmosphere and here's the basic way it works. And so I think there needs to be more than meteorology degrees. There has to be general communication clarity. I think it's an advantage for people in our field, because even though it's crazy, it gives us a lot of chance to provide hooks for the media and to get our voice out. But I don't want to drown in irrationality either.
Yeah, Matt, or at the beginning of the show, I showed Channel 9 in Oklahoma. They did a report on what happened to their weather radar, and their meteorologist is one of dozens, I'd say, at least that I've known of, and probably hundreds who are trying to, at the local level, push back. How much do you think, how much of, it won't be a solution, but how much of a pathway toward more rational approaches to weather information can come through meteorologists, just your broadcasters and the like? It felt like in that case, it was a teachable moment, maybe.
I think you raise a good point. I think it's tricky because so few broadcasters and so few meteorologists want to risk potentially alienating part of their audience by contradicting their erroneous thoughts and views, such that they don't really touch these topics. It's like why so many meteorologists don't really talk much about climate change or include climate in their or climate context in their hits. They want to be popular, and I get that. But at the beginning of my career, I made a decision that I'd much rather be respected than popular, and I'd much rather be truthful than convenient. And I mean, believe me, I've gotten complaints. I've gotten people sending me nasty grams, nasty messages. I've got people telling me that I'm not welcome in their states. And at the end of the day, my goal is never to engage in confrontation, but is to engage in dialogue. I don't expect to agree with, and I don't expect people to agree with me. But if I can at least enter into conversation with someone who has a false preconceived worldview, if nothing else, I can understand a bit of the psychology behind how they arrived at that outlandish conclusion, such that I can better educate my audience in the future. It's so tricky because people in American culture teaches people to win when they argue. They don't teach people to understand the other side. I think that is pervasive in politics, but it's especially pervasive in scientific discourse. People will believe what they want about climate change, about weather conspiracies, about the foolish drones that were purportedly flying over New Jersey, about any conspiracy these days. And they've made their mind up. No amount of science or education or evidence in the world is going to contradict them. You could have a person say the sky is green all the time, and you could bring them outside and show them the sky is blue, and they'd say it was a prank. You have people who believe the sun is a different color than it used to be. No matter how much science or evidence you show someone, they're just going to believe what they want. And so at this point, my goal isn't even to change the minds of these conspiracy theorists. It's to prevent these conspiracy theories from spreading and subverting the general public's beliefs and ability to distinguish fact from fantasy. And it's so frustrating. And one thing I'll say too, I may not have found the perfect solution on social media on how to do this. I try to balance putting out good information and calling out bad information, but I try to do so with a touch of humor to maintain some semblance of charisma. Because if you're fighting all the time on social media, then nobody on either side wants to hear what you have to say. If you do it with a touch of humor in a way that can entertain, but also correct incorrect narratives, I find there's a little bit better of traction with that. And part of it too, once in a while, you do have to poke fun at folks who willfully believe crazy things. And so I feel like in America these days, we're so afraid to tell someone they're wrong, or so afraid to, I don't want to say shame them, but contradict them publicly. There needs to be more of that. 30, 40 years ago, some of the views that half these politicians espouse regarding science would have landed them in an institution or socially ostracized. And nowadays, they're commonplace talking points because people are afraid to call out lunacy. There needs to be more confidence in calling out craziness. And there needs to be some level of societal shame. Everybody is shameless these days.
This is true. And then the other issue, of course, I want to bring this up, that you've been very helpful on, is that the sources of the science are under attack right now. The funding, programs, labs. We mentioned the National Severe Storms Lab earlier, which I flew on a plane out of once around a thunderstorm. And if that is cut off at the root, maybe Jim, you two and Matt can talk about that aspect of it. We have a government right now that's not just sort of expressed anti-scientific views, as we said earlier with Bobby Kennedy and others, but are cutting off the actual capacity to do science. Maybe Jim and then Matt.
Yeah, I think the budget cuts are draconian, and they could be very dangerous. And they're not very much, they're not a very large part of the budget. They're just very visible part. And it has my colleagues really concerned about their grants, their students, their future, their research projects. I wanted to point to that slide you put up about the EPA, because their website talks about government programs, but none of the government programs really relating to WeatherMod have any teeth in them. You have to report to NOAA, but you don't have to justify anything. You don't have to apply for any permits. The NMOD that we talked about earlier, the UN treaty, doesn't have any enforcement capacity.
Right.
There's also the states. They require reporting, some of them, the Western states, but they can't enforce any penalties on this. So I find that transparent EPA website to be a bit disheartening, because it doesn't have any enforcement. There's a growing need to talk about the governance of not just WeatherMod, but of ClimateMod, and how do you govern something you really don't understand, and how do you govern an imaginary set of ideas to dim the sun, or to brighten the clouds. So I'm involved in some of that stuff about governing the ungovernable, or trying to talk about governance issues in a rational way rather than just symbolically gestures.
Yeah, I've done several shows and I've written a lot about the geoengineering issues. We should do a whole another session with you on solar dimming and the like. And I mentioned earlier, Matt, even in 1965, the first report to a president on climate change, the immediate conclusion of the experts, including Wally Broker and others, was, well, maybe we could throw something up there that counteracts the CO2, not to actually reduce the CO2. It's a challenge. I want to get to solutions. I noticed something interesting today. Here's Instagram. And when you put chemtrails into the search box on Instagram, you get what you could expect, just reams and reams, one or two things saying it's fake, it's not something to think about, but then the rest of it is attention hijacking and the like. So that's Instagram. Mm-hmm. And I went on TikTok, And I put in chemtrails. I'll do it right again here. And you get an encouraging box. It says, this phrase may be associated with behavior or content that violates our guidelines. Promoting a safe and positive experience is TikTok's top priority. For more information, go to our guidelines. That strikes me as a little taste of hope. I don't know. What does it feel like?
I mean, in my mind, the social media giants need to either figure out how to begin, I don't want to say censoring, because really censorship's not a good thing, but figure out how to begin curtailing the viral nature of outlandish claims. I mean, I like how Twitter has a community notes feature, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily slow down the spread of misinformation.
Oh,
It's just warning
I,
people.
I filed notes all the time, and it, you know, the
Never
whole
goes
marketing
anywhere.
thing.
It's a flawed system, and Facebook doesn't really even bother to fact check. Stuff can just go crazy on there. Instagram is the same thing. But I mean, I wish there was a good solution. I don't know if there is, because realistically, so many of these big content aggregator accounts and these content conspiracy accounts make tons of money, both for themselves personally and for the parent social media platforms, that Facebook, Twitter have no reason to slow down the spread of these accounts or to ban these accounts. If it's rage bait, if it gets people angry, if it gets people fueled up, if it gets people commenting or talking, then it's successful because it's retaining people longer on social media. The longer we can garner someone's eyeballs and mush their brain, the better. It's more profitable. And expecting any change is assuming that the social media giants are going to do the morally correct thing, which is at odds with the profitably sensible thing. And as long as profit is king, which it always will be, nothing will change. And so to that end, I don't really see any change in the future. I think it's going to get markedly worse. I don't see my career in this field going more than another 10 to 12 years, because in the very near future, the general public will completely lose their ability and their desire to distinguish between fact and fabrication, or fact and fantasy. And once we lose that ability to distinguish reality from what's not reality, and that line becomes blurred, I think there's little hope in ever having a smart society again.
Wow. Jim, do you feel similarly discouraged, or do you think there's more hope?
I don't know. The doom and gloom industry in environmental studies is something that we tried to counteract. I mean, we're all going to die. Don't have children. The earth is poison. Whatever people think they know is not always what is true about things. So I'm not a pessimist. I think that the AI revolution may generate so many fakes and so many images that people won't know. And I feel fortunate that I have part of my career in analog and part of it in digital. And if the kids today are all digital, they may not have any grounding for what they think. But I'm not a pessimist. I tell people, go ahead and have your families and have your careers and work with whatever's given, in the environment for you.
Yeah, I think there are some possibilities. When Helene, the horrible rumors around Helene, I don't know if I know you guys remember, you probably posted about it, Matt, when even there were threats to Hurricane Hunter crews, because their planes theoretically were distributing chemicals. I did a post on, amid toxic online fakery around Helene, a homegrown videographer chronicles reality. I was so struck. Out in North Carolina in the hinterlands, there was all this insane stuff about Chimney Rock with heaps of bodies, and this young guy here, Mark Honeycutt, who was a YouTuber. He was like a paragliding YouTuber. And he hiked in himself and started to report on the reality on the ground. He interviewed locals, and they're just cleaning up, and it was terrible. And a couple of people died, but it wasn't this big plot against America. And if we can facilitate more Mark Honeycutts, local grown communicators of reality, I think that's one possibility. One possibility. Here he was on Facebook at the time, saying I hiked to Chimney Rock. And then I do think, whether it's the AMS or the meteorological I see. I know what you're saying. You've seen it for sure with the climate question for local meteorologists, but they really need to take ownership of this too, and not just wait till their weather radar is sabotaged, like happened in Channel 9 out in Oklahoma City.
There's,
I mean, imagine peak
there's
tornadoes.
one other aspect of Helene. I thought about, well, all the controversy was going on, whether FEMA was going to clean up the hinterland or put their resources here or there. And that is, Asheville was a lot smaller than rural North Carolina. And so the chances of a hurricane going through the rural communities is much greater, just by simple aerial coverage. And I don't know if others have written about this, but I just thought it's probably more likely to hit the underdeveloped areas. And that was politicized. I mean, that was obviously
Oh my gosh, yeah. There's a question that just came in. Tim Wacker says, hey, can you ask your guests if they think climate change has passed a tipping point? This is something I've written a lot about since like 2005, but maybe you could each weigh in on that question.
Yeah, so I hate the phrase tipping point because, well, it's true that Earth can exist in several different stable states, and that right now we're in an unstable equilibrium, meaning we can go in either direction towards a hothouse or a cold Earth. It's untrue that there's this imaginary cliff we're going to fall off that's irreversible. What I try to communicate to the general public is that the climate is sort of like a freight train. Once you nudge it in one direction and it accelerates a little bit, it's very difficult to slow that freight train down and reverse course. Now, there's no inherently good or bad climate. There's no perfect climate for everybody. I guarantee you, if you were spending the winters in Inner Mongolia, you'd probably hate that climate. If you were spending the winters in Norilsk, Russia, you probably wouldn't like that climate. Likewise, if you're spending July in Sudan, you probably wouldn't like that climate. But what we have instead is a climate, and we built our infrastructure to be attuned to said climate. Now, with the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and the shifting of the climate towards more a hothouse Earth scenario where we have a warmer and a wetter world, we're seeing more precipitation extremes and more warm temperature extremes and changing weather conditions. That evolution of the weather and climate is to some extent outpacing the infrastructure that we built. We are not evolving as quickly as the conditions are evolving. And so what I try to communicate to the public is that the weather isn't necessarily becoming bad and the climate's not becoming this evil, undesirable climate for everybody, but instead it's throwing us a curveball in that things are changing in a way that we haven't built our infrastructure around. What once may have been a 100-year flood is now occurring maybe every 30, 40 years. Hurricanes will become, in many cases, stronger, more prone to rapid intensification, and more prone to stalling and dumping more rainfall. Tornado season may become a little bit wider. And so we have these new challenges to combat. If we would like the climate to stop moving in that direction, we need to, of course, alter course in terms of our emissions. But that might require such a large economic overhaul that the net result of that might be more dangerous or more pernicious than the effects of the climate. So it's a bit of a give and take. I don't like the whole climate doom and gloom. I don't like climate hippieism. I also don't like the idea of let's pollute the earth because who gives a damn about the climate? I don't like that either. There has to be nuance in the middle ground, but unfortunately, Americans are not very good at nuance and especially not good at understanding probabilities and different scenarios of risk.
Yeah, and Jim, any thoughts?
Well, there's some major modelers like Tim Lenton in the UK who show that there could be multiple tipping points in the models of their climate. I agree with Matt here that I think the real tipping point is more attitudinal. The tipping point we were talking about earlier about the dumbing down, about reaching a point of despair, it might be greater. That tipping point mentally might be greater than the physical changes that we see around the earth and its infrastructure interaction. So I agree with Matt, and I think that we have to look at the history, the humanities, the way people talk, the public perception, and just as much as we do take a look at the actual science of things.
Yeah, I talk about the social climate being the one that really matters enormously. And of course, the information climate is a big part of that, how we communicate with each other.
Right.
And I I would like to think I've had conversations here before with people like Renee Hobbs, who's a professor at URI, University of Rhode Island, whose focus is propaganda literacy.
Okay.
In other words, how to understand what you're being immersed in. And I do think, somewhere in young people's minds, young people I talk to, no one wants to be conned, right? If there's a way to harness that and build a K-pop kind of swarm effect around stuff that's just ridiculous, to make reality cool again. I think I actually made a hashtag of that once, make reality cool again. Not that I'm sure it wasn't totally cool at any one point in history, that maybe there's possibilities here. It's been great to have you both on. Hey, Matt, amid all, I'd love to have you come back on sometime when
Of course.
you're
My pleasure.
doing your journeys. You're a great communicator, and I just love what you're doing. And
Nice.
the same, Jim Fleming. We should do a whole other thing on the solar dimming.
Yeah.
I've done a couple when the National Academy's report came out a few years ago. I did a session on that too. But here we are, and I'm going to sign off here in beautiful Maine, where we've had spectacular weather, even as other parts of the country have experienced horrific extremes. Not that I'm saying everyone should move here right away, but there is a lot of room here too, and a lot of open jobs. So think about that. The climate migration is another thing we've done shows on, and probably will do more on again. So Matt Capucci, Jim Fleming.
Thank you, Andy.
Stay safe, stay sane, and Matt, don't lose hope.
Can do. And thanks, y'all.
Yeah.
This is Andy Revkin, Sustain What, signing off. And please share this with others as soon as we're done. The link you're watching on becomes a shareable archived video. Take care.